My name's Richard Jeffs. I'm a former TV producer. I used to work for ITV, and then I became a director of photography for the BBC on some of the flagship series such as Panorama and Watchdog. In my late 20s, I left the industry and I started a tech company where I started a business that was aimed towards the future of work. So we design a work management system for freelancers, and I developed an interest in the fourth industrial revolution, which then it caught my attention of the World Economic Forum and what they were doing with regards to the fourth industrial revolution. And in 2020, they released the Great Reset. And when there was a rise in authority, I decided to come back and become an investigative filmmaker. And I made The New Normal in 2020, which was the first documentary to investigate the World Economic Forum and their Great Reset plan. And that was a big hit. And then I went away for a couple of years to research the World Economic Forum further to find out precisely what's going on. And then last year, I released a series of documentaries called Stakeholder Capitalism, which is essentially the full plan for transitioning us to a global authoritarian political system, as I mentioned, called Stakeholder Capitalism, which I'll be delighted to share more info about with you.
Yeah, and you're getting maybe close to 1 million views, are you, on your video, your documentary on stakeholder capitalism, right?
Yes, it's frustrating though. I think it should be a documentary that's seen by everyone around the world, but the reach is very small at the moment. It's going viral, but it's happening very slowly, and that's because it's individuals who've seen the film, generally with smaller networks, are all pushing to get everyone else to see it. They're posting it everywhere, but for some reason at the moment, a lot of the big influencers are not sharing it, and that's the next part of my journey, to get them to understand precisely what's happening and to help them spread the message more widely.
So I think it's a wonderful film. I've seen it myself. And do you want to talk about some of the main points that you make in that film?
Yes, thanks, Tom. Yeah, so everything that we see happening around the world today is a result, or since 2020, is the result of the World Economic Forum, in particular, the founder, Klaus Schwab, enacting a plan called the Great Reset of Capitalism. Excuse me while I clear my throat. And the Great Reset of Capitalism is essentially a 10-year plan to shift us to a new socio-economic system called stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholder capitalism is essentially a global authority, or we'd say maybe like a global government that's essentially, how would you describe it most simply? I would say it's communism, but on a global scale. So how Klaus Schwab explains it as being an economist, that there are two existing economic systems used around the world before 2020, and that is shareholder capitalism and state capitalism. Shareholder capitalism is a system we have in the West. It's also known as free market capitalism. And in the East, they have state capitalism, which is also known as Chinese communism, or communism, depending on where you are in the world. Klaus Schwab alleges that these two existing systems have several flaws, and that we now need a new global political system that is more inclusive and sustainable. So what he's saying is that shareholder capitalism, or free market capitalism, well, he's saying that this causes several problems because it encourages companies to put profit before people, and that Black and trans people and other people of diversity are oppressed, and climate change is killing the planet. And as a result of COVID-19, it's exposed several fragilities within our system, and that we need a new political system. We need to move away from this free market capitalism system to this new global political system that also replaces communism in the East. And what stakeholder capitalism does, it shifts authority to a group of the world's most powerful people called stakeholders, the World Economic Forum's elite members. And they are the heads of most Fortune 500 companies, most NGOs such as the UN, the EU, and the WHO, and most G20 governments, which include the US, the UK, France, and many European countries, as well as China and Russia. So what essentially stakeholder capitalism does, it positions the World Economic Forum and their elite members as a new global government.
So a major pillar of this whole thing is the climate scam, right? That they have to control us because CO2 is causing bad weather. They're really leaning on this part of it, aren't they?
Yes, so the sustainability part of this is the totalitarian part of the model. So with any transition away from a free market system to an authoritarian system, such as what happened during the Cultural Revolution in China, the tyrants who want to get everyone to adopt a new authoritarian political system, they rely on disseminating propaganda to indoctrinate the public into wanting the new system. So if you have a look at China at the moment, the reason why a handful of tyrants within the government can inflict harmful tyranny on the entire population is by indoctrinating the public to want it, to make them believe that the existing free democratic system it has several problems. It's dangerous. It causes harm to their society, and that they need this authoritarian system to make society fairer, to make society more safe. And the same strategies are being deployed currently in this current move away from free market capitalism to this authoritarian political system called stakeholder capitalism, because the two policies, as you pointed out, one is sustainable, which is based upon the idea that climate change poses an existential threat. That's being caused by shareholder or free market capitalism, and the way to solve that is to shift to stakeholder capitalism, because it's got these sustainable policies, which we'll come on to as well. And then the other policy as well that they're using to try and make us want stakeholder capitalism is these inclusive ideas. So they're saying that Black and trans people and other people with diversity are oppressed by free market capitalism, and that we need to move to stakeholder capitalism, because stakeholder capitalism's got its DEI policies. And what DEI means is that companies are, they're being encouraged at the moment, but they will be forced to adopt the stakeholder capitalism DEI policies using the ESG score, something else we'll come on to a bit more in the conversation, because the diversity, equity, inclusion policies make the economy more inclusive of people who are oppressed, and they do that by discriminating against the alleged oppressor, i.e. the white man who's supposedly dominating the workplace. And so DEI essentially discriminates against the white person and essentially gives a leg up to anyone, any person of diversity, to get them in, specific roles. So that's essentially what stakeholder capitalism does with the DEI. And then, as you mentioned, the sustainable ideas are based upon climate change posing an existential threat. And the solution to that is stakeholder capitalism's net zero policy. So if you ever wondered where the term net zero comes from, this was designed by Klaus Schwab as part of his idea to get us to want stakeholder capitalism. And what net zero does, it bans any fossil fuels by 2030. So as we explained earlier, it's the totalitarian part of the model, because everything that we do with regards to travel, even having these conversations right now over the internet, it's powered by all of this technology, all this electricity, and our gasoline vehicles, and flying by plane and eating meat, and all of these things are supposedly killing the planet because they're powered by some form of fossil fuels. With regards to the meat, that's the cow's burps that emit methane and carbon dioxide, and that's obviously one thing that Klaus Schwab and his key stakeholders want to ban as well. So yeah, it's so just to summarize, it's a complicated thing to get your head around, but once you do, you can see that all of the the trans movement, all of the wokery with regards to the inclusive ideas that are happening around the world, trans people taking part in female-only sports and using female-only spaces. This is because we're transitioning to stakeholder capitalism, and it's exactly the same with the climate change madness. With regards to net zero, this is all being driven by our move to stakeholder capitalism, and we're 50% into that transition to full stakeholder capitalism. So it began at 2020, we're now 2025, and we reach full stakeholder capitalism at 2030. And so the next 5 years is essentially the worst half of this this plan, this transitional period for us. As I say, we've got the worst yet to come.
I hear people using this term cultural Marxism. Do you want to talk about what that is or what are examples of that?
Yes, cultural Marxism. So Marxism is an idea to say that the working class are oppressed by free market capitalism, by the capitalists, because the working class are exploited for their labor. And that Marx and Engels hypothesized that once the working class realized that they were oppressed, that they were being taken advantage of, they would rise up and overturn capitalism in favor of a system called communism. Now, that was an idea that was discussed, and okay, that makes some sense. But then tyrants took hold of this idea, and they created a plan to try and manipulate people to believe that they were oppressed, such as what happened in the Cultural Revolution in China. So they targeted the working class to make them believe they were oppressed. And then Mao then encouraged them to join social justice movements, which were called the Red Guards in China, to go out on the streets and physically overturn capitalism in favor of communism. So to get rid of all traditional ideas, the four olds, as Mao put them, to get rid of any tradition to do with democracy or anyone who had these democratic ideas, and then to get them to go out there and literally hurt and kill anyone who was in favor of capitalism. And that could even be your local teacher. So he was very much targeting the kids at school, the students. Many teachers got very hurt and killed during this process. And I mean, you wouldn't even consider teachers as the capitalists, would you? But they were an easy target, obviously, for the students. And then they were took to the streets, and they physically overturned, these capitalists to get to want, communism. And then once Mao finished with them, once he reached this idea of communism that he so desired, the students in the Red Guards were all then shipped away to, out to the farms and so forth. He got what he wanted from them by manipulating them and getting them to go out and do his work for him. So that was an idea that then developed into a term called cultural Marxism and Maoism or neo-Marxism. There's a few terms for it. And Klaus Schwab and Henry Kissinger, who was Klaus Schwab's mentor in the late 60s, were witnessing this, and then decided to use exactly the same playbook to try and get us to want to move away from free market capitalism to this global authoritarian political system, which was their goal, which they've called stakeholder capitalism. So that's essentially what cultural Marxism is. But instead of targeting the working class, Klaus Schwab has, over the past 50 years, since he launched the World Economic Forum, since he founded the World Economic Forum, for the precise reason of transitioning the world to stakeholder capitalism, he's been targeting other demographics such as feminism. So that's all come out of Klaus Schwab's movement to get us to want stakeholder capitalism. And he's targeted black and gay, and now he's on trans people and so forth. So he's targeting specific demographics with propaganda that make them feel that they're oppressed, and other people who are susceptible to these woke ideas to believe that black and trans people are oppressed, to get them to go out and join social justice movements such as Black Lives Matter and gender identity movements, to get them to literally overturn free market capitalism for stakeholder capitalism. So that was what all the riots were about with regards to the BLM riots in 2020, was Klaus Schwab and his stakeholders, his alliance of people who are working with him to roll out the Great Reset Plan. They were indoctrinating ideas or propagating ideas to make us believe that black people were oppressed, and then encouraging them to join Black Lives Matter, which is similar to the Red Guards, and getting people to go out and, burn down, shops and other places that are very much connected with this whole free market capitalism idea, to get them to want a more inclusive political system. So it's the same playbook that's being used today that was used during the Cultural Revolution to get us to want a more inclusive political system.
Yeah, so I think you're doing a great job of tying this together for me. So I'm starting to understand this better, that it's very important in this push for communism and global government. People have to feel like they're a victim. And then also we need a global problem. Like we have to do all this stuff to fight CO2, or CO2 is going to kill us all. It's all tied together, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So the two components. So the main thing about stakeholder capitalism is that, so it's the economic system that replaces both, our democratic free market capitalism system and the Chinese style, communist system, with this global political system that shifts authority to the world's most powerful people, including Xi Jinping, who's the head of the Chinese Communist Party. And essentially what they're trying to do is what they have is two policies: inclusive and sustainable. And both of those policies are designed to make us want stakeholder capitalism. It's to make us be angry that a subset of our community are oppressed, and to get us to actively overturn capitalism by encouraging us to join social justice movements, to drive the shift from the bottom up to stakeholder capitalism. And the second policy is sustainable, based upon the idea that climate change poses an existential threat. And unless we give up our freedom to travel and eat meat and lots of other activities and reside within these 15-minute cities that Klaus Schwab has designed, so that we have everything we need and therefore we don't need to go anywhere, according to Klaus Schwab, then the world is going to end. So he's making us angry that we're oppressed, and he's making us fearful that climate change poses an existential threat. And his big solution is a pre-planned solution, that is stakeholder capitalism, with its inclusive and sustainable ideas, the DEI and net zero ideas as the solution. So Klaus Schwab is here to save the day for all of us.
So you do see this as a top-down thing that's coming mostly from the WEF, and we need to fight them. There's nobody above them that's pushing this. I'm trying to understand also the split between people who actually want us to go to global government, and the people who are just even people in power who think they're doing the right thing, and they think they really are preventing bad weather, and they really are preventing racism, all that stuff.
Well, it's very much a top-down idea. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the communism is an idea, right? It's the world's biggest cult, and the only way that you get people to want, to accept communism is to get them to want it. So if you ask someone in China about their social credit system, they will turn around and say, yes, they need it. They need it to make the society fairer. But they've been indoctrinated with that idea. It's a belief, and I don't think that while they believe it to be true, it doesn't make sense to them. So that when they actually talk about it, they're a little bit hesitant, because a lot of these ideas don't make any sense, just like what we're seeing today with the trans movement, with these trans ideas and climate change. When you actually start asking questions, people then start to recoil, because a lot of the ideas don't make sense. So yeah, it's a group of people at the very top who are very powerful, who are the heads of mainstream media, the heads of governments, the heads of the most powerful organizations in the world, such as the UN, the EU, the WHO, and Fortune 500 companies that are all working together under a plan called the Great Reset of Capitalism to indoctrinate us to want stakeholder capitalism by making us fearful of climate change and angry about our society being oppressed. So yes, and then the World Economic Forum do have strategic partnerships with our king here in the UK, who is driving our transition to stakeholder capitalism as well, with a lot of his policies and organizations that he has. The same with the UN. The UN have their 17 sustainable goals under Agenda 2030. Agenda 2030 is just another name for stakeholder capitalism. Agenda 2030 is the agenda for what the world looks like by 2030 under stakeholder capitalism. So the 10-year plan that shifts us away from free market capitalism in 2020 to full stakeholder capitalism by 2030, called the Great Reset, or the Great Reset of Capitalism, which is what they called it before. They shortened it. Has several mechanisms to destabilize our countries, make us poor, make us in a position where we are more vulnerable to accept these totalitarian conditions. And part of that is taking ownership of the food supply chain, crashing the financial system, and so forth. And then, remarkably, the UN have these 17 sustainable goals, which is then to save us from poverty and starvation, which they're causing, which the World Economic Forum are causing, and the financial crash and all of these things. So the Agenda 2030 is essentially the agenda to improve the world once the stakeholders, the World Economic Forum's elite members called key stakeholders, have essentially destroyed the world.
So do you see people like Klaus as an evil genius, or is he delusional in that he thinks he's going to force us to eat bugs to prevent bad weather? Which one is he, do you think?
Well, he is an evil genius, absolutely. He's got 17 doctorates, and he's this shift to stakeholder capitalism is his life's work. So he founded, as I mentioned earlier, the World Economic Forum in 1971 for the specific reason to transition us to full stakeholder capitalism. He's failed several times, but in 2020, he understood, leading up to 2020, that there is this period happening in our future called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the Fourth Industrial Revolution is a time which probably wouldn't really come into play until 2030, 2035, when artificial intelligence takes our jobs. So an industrial revolution, the meaning of the word industrial revolution is a complete shift away, or it's a disruption in our economy and in the workplace, and it changes the way we work. So for example, the third industrial revolution was a time when the internet was created, and there was a move away from, manual analog work to digital internet, work with a global audience. And a good example of creative disruption, which is the term for this, is Blockbuster Video. I'm not sure whether you have it there in the US. I think you do. You did, yeah. We had it big here in the UK, Blockbuster Video, where you can go to a store and you can rent videos and then DVDs. But when in the third industrial revolution, there was the internet, and once that became faster, then there was the likes of Netflix, where people then began streaming their videos, and Blockbuster Video become bankrupt. So we saw creative disruption and a shift from one business, which was, a big business at the time, that completely went bankrupt over the course of, over a couple of years during the shift to the third industrial revolution, and then Netflix thrived. And what we're seeing today is the fourth industrial revolution, which is on our doorstep, which changes the workplace again and the way we work, away from people being manual labor, providing the labor, to machines and automation and artificial intelligence. And what this does, unlike any previous industrial revolution, is that it makes many of us unemployed, and that will have catastrophic consequences on the majority of us who the World Economic Forum project will be unemployed, within the next few years. So what Klaus Schwab has done has recognized that there is a time in the future that completely disrupts our workplace, completely disrupts our economy. And he's using this as a time when he says capitalism, free market capitalism, is broken because most of us will be unemployed, and therefore there'll be less money moving around the economy, and less jobs available. And this causes some economic problems, such as how do the people who have lost their jobs to artificial intelligence receive an income and pay for their mortgage and pay for their food? Currently, the safety nets that are available under free market capitalism is funded by the taxpayer. So if you are unable to work, Tom, there is this safety net called welfare or benefits, depending on where you are in the world, that will provide you with, that safety net so you can buy some food and pay for your rent, etc. But in the fourth industrial revolution, there's going to be less people working, less people paying tax. So those welfare and benefit pots of money are going to shrink. And there's not going to be enough money in those pots to support the growing number of unemployed. So essentially, this causes a flaw or a crash in our economic system, and this is a good opportunity, Klaus Schwab alleges, to shift us to a more inclusive and sustainable system. So he's using this jobs crisis as a mechanism to bring in a new political system.
So how about all the money printing and the crazy government spending? Is there any deliberate effort to try to force a global financial crisis and then they can shove in a CBDC? Is that happening?
Exactly, yeah. And you've just mentioned it there as well. So while they want to shift us to a new economic system, there's also the finance system that they want to completely disrupt as well. So they've been working on a digital form or a digital currency for quite some time. And if the markets crash, and I think when I was doing my research into this about a year and a half ago, when I was looking into the financing industry, about 14 countries had already gone bankrupt since 2020, and then also because of the war in between Ukraine and Russia. There is a lot of countries that have been borrowing a lot of money, and the debt has hit the ceiling in the US around that time, 18 months ago. The US debt hit a ceiling, and I think Janet Allen, who is the US secretary, the finance secretary in the US, is going back. My research is going back a year and a half. So please excuse me if I'm getting some of the details inaccurately. But Janet Allen made a report at the time to say that the US have hit their debt ceiling because of all the money that's been having to borrow and send out to the Ukraine, and that could cause a catastrophic financial crash. And the World Economic Forum are projecting a financial crash that is equal to that of the Great Depression. So in the most recent reports as well, the World Economic Forum are reporting 42% of us will be unemployed by 2027, and that's actually been reduced from 50% by 2025, which was their initial forecast that they created in 2020. So the financial crash could precipitate an accelerated transition to the fourth industrial revolution, and then that also provides them the opportunity to bring in a digital currency called central bank digital currency, CBDC, that enables them to essentially control the financial system and the monetary system. This will be a digital currency that's provided within an app, within a digital ID system, and then that currency is also programmable. So this enables them to be able to put an expiry date on that money that you have, to ensure that you only spend it with specific places, and they can switch it off if you don't abide to any of their rules. So this new system that they're creating provides them full totalitarian control, similar to what's happening in China, where if you misbehave in a way that the government don't like, so if you breach any of their rules and you get a low social credit score, then they can just switch your money off, and then you don't have any money, you can't travel anywhere, and so forth. So it's a means of control.
And the censorship is incredibly important in all of this, right? That they're trying to crack down on free speech and on social media, et cetera.
Correct. So as I mentioned earlier on, the key component for any transition to an authoritarian system is all about propaganda. It's to make people believe that there's something wrong with the current system and that they need a new system to make the world more inclusive and sustainable, which is what's happening today. And anyone who has an opposing voice, well, then they need to be censored. Because these ideas, these communist or stakeholder capitalism ideas, There's no real factual basis to them. They don't make sense. So anyone who does come up with the facts, just like what you've been doing and with some of your colleagues with the work that you've been doing, especially around climate change as well, once you present those facts, they're not able they're not able to allow you onto the mainstream stage to debate them because obviously they're factual. So the only way to deal with that is to censor you, so you don't have a voice whatsoever. So that they deplatform you, they smear you through the media, and then that's what cancel culture has also been born from. So censorship, cancel culture, these are all Chinese communism ideas. You only see censorship and cancel culture happening in Chinese states, and that's because they need to shut down the opposing voices. So that's why that's so important to all of this. And people like J.K. Rowling are being cancelled for saying that, trans men or trans women, biological men, shouldn't be allowed to take part in female sports. Well, of course they shouldn't. And the only way to deal with that is to cancel her and smear her to make her seem like she's transphobic. And the same things are happening today with smearing anyone who has an opposing voice. They're called right wing, they're called Nazis. So immediately the majority of people won't even listen to them because they have this label of being right wing or racist or whatever.
So that brings up this whole thing, this vibe shift that I think I am seeing, and the trans issue is a big part of that. I think in the U.S. it's maybe 80-20. People, 80% think that men should not be playing women's sports, and we got to J.K. Rowling agreeing with Trump on X about that. Do you see a vibe shift happening where there's more common sense now than there was 5 years ago?
Yes. So a lot of the DEI ideas are being, being pushed back on, especially in the US after Trump has rejected them at the World Economic Forum and a couple of other speeches he's done previously. But these are ludicrous ideas, and a lot of people can, understand just how mad they are and just how they've just popped up all of a sudden. This isn't, something that's happened over several decades where we've been debating it on mainstream media. This is just this idea that's popped up that you can be any gender that you think you are, and there's more than two genders, and you could be born into the wrong body, and that's a fact. These are all just ideas that are just completely crazy. So a lot of people are seeing through that and push back on it, which is good to see. But the thing that does scare me the most is the climate change propaganda. A lot of people very much do believe that climate change is being caused by us, and that it's us humans that are destroying the planet. And unless we give up our use of oil, I'm not sure whether you in the US have Just Stop Oil organizations, or we've got a few here in the UK where people join these organizations. They go out on the street, they glue their hand to the road. And the idea of that is to stop traffic, to stop anyone using a vehicle, because they believe that these people driving around in their gasoline vehicles are killing the planet, and that they should all be forced to ride a bicycle or take the bus, and unless we give up our use of gasoline vehicles, then the world's going to end. And they're that scared about this that they're actually go to such extreme measures, even throwing paint over Van Gogh paintings and expensive paintings around the world, and doing taking part in some pretty extreme stunts. So that's how severe the indoctrination is, and that there are a lot of people who I know are heavily indoctrinated by this idea, and these ideas are very difficult to remove. So even when you do present them with facts, just like what you're doing, it's very difficult to get through to them because beliefs are more powerful than facts.
So I had other people on here who have said that maybe this climate cultism, it's really strong still in the UK and maybe Germany, but elsewhere it's dying. I think that might be true. I'm curious, in your personal experience, as you just talk to people in real life, do they bring it up a lot that they're worried about global warming, climate change?
Yeah, well, I've got I moved away from a lot of my friends who became very I use the term woke. So woke is a term that essentially means somebody who's indoctrinated with the inclusive and sustainable ideas. They believe that a subset of our community are oppressed and climate change poses an existential threat. So that's essentially what this woke term means. But when the pandemic happened, of course, the same propaganda was deployed on the population to make the majority of people believe that anyone who questions the policies during the lockdown, such as lockdown policies, is also a dangerous right-wing conspiracy theorist. So I moved away from a lot of my friends who behave like communists during the pandemic by becoming very aggressive towards anyone who did start to speak out and question the policies and the narrative that has been disseminated by mainstream media in 2021 and 2020. So I've got a small group of people with friends and some other former colleagues in media who are heavily indoctrinated by these ideas, who I don't speak to much about them, but I've tried to, show them the film. So my documentary, Stakeholder Capitalism, which I released in October, is a 40-minute film, and it proves irrefutably, without question, and because it's all coming from the World Economic Forum, I've essentially allowed Klaus Schwab to tell the story, and we tell it through reports and talks at the World Economic Forum. And that's what makes it irrefutable, the evidence. So I spent 2 years finding the evidence by going through reports, by going through the World Economic Forum's talks to convey this story. So the story is told by them, which makes this, and that's what makes it irrefutable. Despite seeing this documentary, a lot of people recognize that we're transitioning to stakeholder capitalism, but they then go, okay, well, it must be a good thing then, because, the world is, many people are oppressed and climate change is posing an existential threat, and we need this new system. So first of all, we've got them to recognize that we're transitioning to another political system. They recognize it's a global authoritarian political system. They can see it's happening undemocratically and discreetly. All of these things should be huge red flags for most people, but most people's beliefs, because they're indoctrinated, they believe, well, it all must be a good thing because the government, we trust the government, we trust the media, and anyone who says that the governments and the media are trying to remove our freedoms, well, they're a dangerous right-wing conspiracy theorist, and we don't want to be associated with that. Therefore, stakeholder capitalism must be a good thing, and it's absurd, it's ludicrous. The amount of the extent to which the programming has occurred and indoctrinated people's minds is chronic at the moment, and that's going to be a very difficult thing for us to shift.
So there's this warmist on X called Sabina Hassenfelder, and she's constantly selling the climate scam. And she put out a video just 2 days ago that had some delicious quotes in it from my perspective about throwing in the towel on the climate scam. I'm just going to read a few here for fun. She said, cool. Global businesses are done pretending they care about carbon neutrality. Fossil fuel is back in fashion. The net zero banking alliance is falling apart. I suspect that these banks will soon stop pretending they even care. The trend away from carbon neutrality is obvious. Google's parent company, Alphabet, ended its carbon neutrality program. And then the last thing, most countries' net zero plans are empty words. It's only a matter of time until they're abandoned. So I don't want to declare victory, but things are looking better, I think. I think there really is a real vibe shift here where people are not buying into this scam. So,
absolutely, yeah. In the US, there's a huge revolution happening since Trump, Kennedy, Musk have come together and pushing back on this. In the UK here, though, we still have Starmer, who is a communist and is very much pushing the DEI and net zero policies really hard. We need what's happening over in the US to happen here to be able to push back. But ultimately, I agree that there could be a lot of positivity happening, and the whole economic. What was it that she mentioned about the
net zero banking alliance? No.
Yeah, it's to do with the banking alliance. It's all to do with the climate change currency. It's something to do with the economy, to do with climate change. The But that's all ESG essentially. So ESG means environmental social governance. It's a scoring system that has been placed on companies. Here in the UK, it's now mandatory for large companies to report ESG. But environmental social governance, the E means environmental. That relates to the climate change scam. The S means social, which means the inclusive ideas and scams. And then the G means governance, which means the World Economic Forum's elite members who govern us. And what ESG was designed to do is to get us or force companies to adopt the DEI policies and the net zero policies because they score us on how inclusive and sustainable we are. Now, that then becomes a way to force companies to adopt stakeholder capitalism, because if you get a low score, then you're not eligible for funding by the big organizations such as BlackRock. And a lot of the big companies rely on external funding from investors. And if you don't get your funding, you can't grow, and it's the end of your business. So that's how ESG has been designed, to force companies to want stakeholder capitalism. But yeah, as you said, there is a lot of pushback with that as well at the moment.
Yeah, I'm just looking at a headline here, actually from June of 23, saying BlackRock's Larry Fink says he stopped using the weaponized term ESG. So that made me happy that I think it became so toxic that he didn't want to use it anymore. And I think the same thing is happening with the acronym DEI, that Elon Musk, for example, a lot of other people are speaking out against DEI because it's so crazy that your doctor is not chosen by merit, but people that are allowed to go through the training, they're chosen by the color of their skin. And do we really want to do that? I think there is a vibe shift.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. But, you know, I'm envious of what's happening in the US. But in the UK here, it's pretty horrendous still. And they're ramping up with the censorship and a lot of the totalitarian measures, as is a lot of other countries that are led by the World Economic Forum's elite members, the key stakeholders, such as France and so forth. So, so I believe that there is a revolution happening. And I think that there needs to be greater pushback. I think one of the solutions for this is for everyone to start talking about stakeholder capitalism as the root cause of all of this, because it explains really, simply why all these things are happening, why ESG is there, why the diversity, equity, inclusion ideas are there, why all the climate change madness is happening. It's because of stakeholder capitalism. And of course, if a group of powerful elites are shifting us discreetly away from free market capitalism to a global authoritarian political system, well, that's treason. And my film presents clear evidence of our leaders. Your former leader, Biden, was committing treason by transitioning us away from free market capitalism to an authoritarian political system that gives Xi Jinping in China control throughout the West. So while the Trump administration has rejected a lot of these policies, they're still being pushed here in the UK, which does mean that Xi Jinping still has some control and leverage in the UK political system.
Yeah, I really would like to see a lot more people watch your videos, watch your documentaries, because they're fantastic. Have you entered them into any film festivals, for example? Or do you think people might have some small watch parties and get together and watch them? Or what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm just an individual. I've now created an organization called Yellow.Forum, where you can go, and I've spent the past 2 years researching and creating content that exposes everything, as well as all the agendas. So the idea of Yellow.Forum is it's a think tank that provides you everything you need to know about what's going on in the world with evidence with regards to this transition, and then also help drive a solution. And one of the first things that I'm trying to do is to roll out is a campaign called Stop Stakeholder Capitalism. So it's to create more awareness, first of all, about stakeholder capitalism. And then we can all come together, partner, to say, look, we now know what's happening. We've got the evidence to prove this. Let's all start talking about stakeholder capitalism. Let's try to help everyone understand what stakeholder capitalism is and how it's responsible for what's going on in the world. Because a lot of people at the moment, they're talking about the rise in authority and and these elites are taking away our freedom, but we haven't really got anything specific to actually associate it to. Now we've got the actual name for it. Now we have the evidence to show that it's happening. So I want to begin with a roadshow here in the UK and then come over to the US. So it's a good time to speak to you, Tom, because I'm looking for help. And when I come to the US, I'd like to put on a roadshow and then start to go onto podcasts to tell the full stakeholder capitalism story and the full Great Reset plan. What I've uncovered is the full plan for transitioning us to stakeholder capitalism. So I know what the next 5 years looks like to get us to stakeholder capitalism and what the world looks like by 2030 if they succeed. But going back to your question about, the revolution that's happening, while Trump and Musk and Kennedy and people like that do appear to be pushing back on stakeholder capitalism and its woke ideas, the stakeholders, the key stakeholders who are the World Economic Forum's elite members who acquire control under stakeholder capitalism, they own the financial system, they own the media, and they're very much still driven to get us to full stakeholder capitalism by 2030. So it's still going to be a difficult ride ahead.
So you are getting some traction on podcasts, so it looks like, right? You're on Doc Malik's podcast, for example?
Correct. Yeah, I've been doing some podcasts here in the UK. I'm still trying to get onto some of the bigger ones. But I found that, I don't know what it's like in the US, but I've been having a difficult time because a lot of people with those big followings don't really want to give me the platform to talk about this and to share my films and so forth, because, I don't know, it's become a bit of a competitive market here in the UK. Everyone's competing for a narrative and for the same followers and all of this. So I've just come onto social media after taking a couple of years out with no followers. And I'm very grateful to people like yourself for giving me a platform to talk about it. But I am starting to get on some podcasts with some people that are very kind and generous and giving me a platform to talk about it. I think one of the big problems here as well that I'm going to face is that I'm also starting another organization called Yellow.Live, harnessing the experience that I had in working in mainstream media. I've got some former mainstream media colleagues as well. So we all know how to create professional films, documentaries, and other content. We recently produced a news show that reports world events in context to the Great Reset transition to stakeholder capitalism. So if something happens around the world, how does that fit in with a bigger plan? So it's a very awake TV channel, a digital TV channel that we're creating. And here in the UK, we have a bit of a problem in that two major World Economic Forum members, the key stakeholders, one is Tim Davie, who's the head of the BBC. The other is Melanie Dawes, who's the head of Ofcom. And Ofcom now have the power under the Digital Safety Act to put people like myself in prison if they feel that we are reporting mis or disinformation. So that's a way to silence opposing voices. So there is a lot of tyranny here in the UK. So I think that I am going to move to the US to set up these two organizations so I'd have more protection and run this global media operations from the US. So if anyone like yourself or any of your audience may be able to help with this, I very much appreciate any help. I could be contacted at info@yellow.forum.
So I heard you right that you might move to the US and part of that reason would be to avoid censorship in Britain.
In tyranny, yes. The tyranny from Ofcom and the mainstream media here. So we can still reach the same audience, but it's just having the business owned by the US government. That's the problem for me at the moment, just because of the new media laws that could. So under this new act for misinformation and disinformation, the Digital Safety Act, the maximum prison sentence is life imprisonment. So it's pretty serious if you disseminate any information that they deem to be misinformation or disinformation, which is anything that we've been talking about, such as climate change is a hoax and people are not oppressed. You can land a lot of prison time. As you've probably heard, there's a lot of people that are going to jail just for writing comments on social media at the moment. So to protect myself, I think that a move to the US will be the safest way to continue my work, to continue my research. And with the right funding as well, if we're looking for investment, we could grow a team of mainstream media producers and professionals to continue our investigation and create news, debate shows, and other things. That's my plan over the next few months.
Whose work do you also like in this space, or like Jakob Nordengard? Do you follow him, or who else is doing some good stuff to expose what's happening here?
So I've seen some of the work you've done, which is great. And there's Guerrilla Science that you're working with as well. Also doing some great work to expose the climate change scandal. So the problem is I've been so immersed within the work that I'm doing. I don't get a lot of time to follow a lot of people, but yeah, I don't see anyone or many people talking about stakeholder capitalism, and it's all very much around Agenda 2030 and so forth, which is not a narrative that I think is useful, because when people talk about Agenda 2030, the UN Agenda 2030 is the problem. If you try to explain that to somebody who's not aware, or who's affected by the indoctrination, well, then they might ask, well, what's Agenda 2030? Well, they've got these 17 sustainable goals. Someone might reply and say, okay, well, what are they? Well, one is that they want to end hunger and poverty, and what's wrong with that? It's hard to convince anyone by talking about Agenda 2030 that there is a huge coup that's happening away from our democratic system to this centralized government, where stakeholder capitalism provides that narrative, provides all the evidence you need to prove this, and that there is treason. So yeah, but I'm very open to partnerships. So if anyone is doing some great work, and I would love to partner, and I've got a lot of research information I'd love to share so that we can spread the information more widely.
And just to be clear, that term stakeholder capitalism is not your term, right? It didn't come from you, it came from the WEF. Is that right?
Come from the WEF, yeah. So I'll explain a little bit about how Klaus Schwab is propagating the idea of stakeholder capitalism. So because his members are the heads of most Fortune 500 companies, and this is essentially an economic system. So you've got state capitalism in the East, shareholder capitalism in the West, and that we need to replace that with stakeholder capitalism. So all of these three systems are economic systems, but they are also socio-economic systems because of how they affect society. And because state capitalism and stakeholder capitalism are both authoritarian systems, then you would consider them as political systems. So just creating the correlation between all three of them. And essentially the Fortune 500 companies were the ones who were really pushing the whole, stakeholder capitalism, DEI and net zero ideas within the economy. And those ideas are filtered down through middle management right the way through a lot of corporations, people who work there who think that ESG, DEI and all of these things are a great idea. But what they're being told is that as I mentioned earlier, shareholder capitalism is a system that encourages companies to exploit people in the interest of generating profit for their shareholders. And some of that is true. So you can see the problem there that's arisen from in the healthcare sector, where pharmaceutical companies, for example, are acting in the interest of profit before people, and a lot of people are being hurt. And if you're aware of just how horrendous this problem is in the healthcare sector, not really looking at ways to heal and instead provide people with drugs to address symptoms, and that's where it starts. The extent of the corruption, you can see how that's true. That idea is true. So a lot of people can relate to that idea. And what Klaus Schwab is saying is that shareholder capitalism and state capitalism have these flaws, as well as it's making, a subset of our community oppressed, and climate change to pose an existential threat. And that these two economic systems, so shareholder capitalism is a system that gives the shareholders control. So I think this is the easiest way to understand it. Shareholder capitalism gives the shareholders to control to act in the interest of generating profit for their shareholders. So we can decide as shareholders under free market capitalism, under shareholder capitalism, who we want to trade with. Where over in the East, state capitalism, well, that shifts that control, the authority to the state. So it's the government who has control, who the companies trade with. So they have full control over the companies, full ownership of those companies. And then under stakeholder capitalism, that authority shifts away from the state and the shareholders to a group of stakeholders. Now, what Klaus Schwab is propagating is the idea that we are all stakeholders under stakeholder capitalism. And if you was to look at Klaus Schwab's book called Stakeholder Capitalism, which he released, I think, in 2022 or 2021, on the front cover is the slogan "People and Planet." That is the slogan for stakeholder capitalism. And what people and planet means is people means the inclusive ideas, planet means the environmental or sustainable ideas, the climate change ideas. And what he's saying is that stakeholder capitalism replaces these two existing ones. He writes about that quite clearly in his blog, and he talks about it openly in a couple of interviews, which is included in my film. So this system replaces these regional political systems with this new global political system that acts in the interest of all people and the planet. Now, under stakeholder capitalism, if the stakeholders have control, just like the shareholders have control under shareholder capitalism, and the state has control under state capitalism, under stakeholder capitalism, if we are all stakeholders, then that would imply we all have control. But of course, we can't all have control. We can't all decide what's best for people and planet. Your ideas on what's best for people and planet would be very different to someone else's. Therefore, Klaus Schwab writes in another blog that it's his key stakeholders who will acquire the authority. And they are, as I mentioned, the heads of most Fortune 500 companies, G20 countries, and NGOs such as the UN, the EU, and so forth. And the reason that he gives that these key stakeholders should have control is because he says they are people and make use of the planet. Therefore, they should act in the interest of all people and the planet, which is just ludicrous. But essentially, all of this is explained in the documentary. Klaus Schwab is very open about our transition to stakeholder capitalism. And the reason why they're talking about it so openly and talk about the Great Reset is because they're positioning it as a really good thing for humanity and trying to get us to want it. They're propagating these ideas that indoctrinate us to want stakeholder capitalism, which is global communism. And what we'll see soon is the majority of people so indoctrinated by these ideas that, just like what's happening with China, if there isn't a revolution, that people want to give up our freedom to move and eat meat and would be happy to be locked down within these 15-minute cities if it removes the fear of climate change killing the planet.
So I could see this idea of stakeholder capitalism really appealing to a guy like Bill Gates, because he's thinking, hey, I'm a big stakeholder. This gives me a lot of power to do what I want. How big of a force is he in the WEF?
Well, Bill Gates is a huge force in the WEF. He's been part of the Klaus Schwab's journey for the past 50 years. So, as I said, Klaus Schwab has founded the World Economic Forum specifically to transition the world to stakeholder capitalism. And all the people who are members, even our king and people like Bill Gates, are all ambassadors for stakeholder capitalism. All of their key stakeholders are ambassadors, and they are driven to transition us to this global authoritarian political system that gives Bill Gates and his colleagues control. So it's an easy sell for Klaus Schwab. He invites executives at Fortune 500 companies onto his program called Young Global Leaders. He also finds aspiring politicians that have been introduced to him somewhere along the line that's shown some form of interest in communist ideas, and he enrolls them on his Young Global Leaders program to indoctrinate them with his inclusive and sustainable ideas. And then he essentially sells them this idea that under stakeholder capitalism, you will have power, you will have control. This is inevitable. We have to reach stakeholder capitalism because the fourth industrial revolution means that our current system, shareholder capitalism becomes broken, and that the wealth shifts to the most powerful organizations in the world because it's their machines that take everyone's jobs, and therefore the people's wages are replaced. Or essentially that money that would come to people for working for their labor, all of that money shifts to the World Economic Forum's elite members who own the machines, the heads of the Fortune 500 companies, and it then becomes their responsibility to provide everyone with a universal basic income, that safety net problem solved with a universal basic UBI, a universal basic income that's provided in the currency of a central bank digital currency. And essentially what Klaus Schwab is doing after indoctrinating them within his Young Global Leaders program is selling them the idea that we need this new global system to solve these problems. This is going to happen anyway. Come with us, be part of the organization, and you acquire control under this new political system. So it's a promise of control.
So I see a lot of this woke BS as being pushed around the world by the legacy media. And how do you think this the demise of USAID, who I don't know if they provided 8% of the funding for BBC, do you think the cutting off of even that funding is going to help us win here?
Totally. Every little thing helps. And it's only been a few weeks since Trump's administration got into power. So, I'm excited to see what happens over the next 6 months, 12 months. But every little thing, like cutting off funding for the BBC, is a really good thing. Yes.
What is your advice on what we can do now to fight all this stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tom. So I really want to get this narrative over to some of the powerful people who are now leading the revolution, it appears, in the US, in the Trump administration, because I think that this just explains everything that's happening. And I also believe that once we all start calling it for what it is, it's our shift away from free market capitalism in the West to this global centralized government with authority over essentially the planet, over people and planet, as Klaus Schwab calls it. Once we start calling it what it is and start making hard accusations of treason, which that's what's essentially happening, the heads of our governments have been misleading us, have been disseminating propaganda to get us to want Chinese communism and to shift power to some of the world's most powerful people, including Xi Jinping and the head of, and Putin, the head of Russia's communist system. So we need to start calling it for what it is. And I would love to see here in the UK some politicians, some opposing politicians, stand up in Parliament and start accusing Starmer for committing treason, for shifting us to stakeholder capitalism, asking the question, are you transitioning us to another political system, a global authoritarian one called stakeholder capitalism? And then that will encourage journalists who are not aware of what's going on in the world to start asking questions. We're being transitioned to another political system. Well, that's not good. Yeah, it's happening discreetly and undemocratically. That's bad. That's treason. And to start looking into this. And once people like Trump and Kennedy and so forth also start saying it, then we then have a narrative that's stronger, and we can then start accusing the people and holding them to account. Anyone who has been involved in this transition, the key stakeholders, the heads of the organizations, people like Mark Zuckerberg, who's now come out with his tail between his legs saying, oh, we're going to stop censorship now. And it's all because of the government. And no, it was you. You're a key stakeholder in this. You are driving Klaus Schwab's plan. Later in the series, I also show how Zuckerberg is a major force in this transition, a key stakeholder. And he's actually someone who is driving the whole UBI part of the system. So each stakeholder has a specific area that they're focusing on. People like Mark Rutte, who was the former head of, he led the party in Sweden at the time when all the farmer protests were happening. And that was all driven by a World Economic Forum initiative as well, called the Food Innovation Hubs. So that's an attempt to take control away from farmers, take ownership away from farmers, and put that farms into the control of into the government. So all of these key stakeholders have specific roles, such as Zuckerberg with the universal basic income, which I exposed in the 3rd episode in the series. We need to start holding everyone to account and not allow them just to go on the Joe Rogan show, for example, and go, oh, it was the government making me to do it, and then giving them a green pass. Everyone needs to be accountable. And then once we do expose precisely what's happening and everyone understands it, we then need to drive some form of campaign or a program to remove the doctrines of people who are heavily indoctrinated. That's not going to be an easy thing. Removing doctrines from a cult, people that indoctrinate within a cult, is a very difficult thing to do. So we need to work out how we do that. And then we need to remove all stakeholders from positions of power too, and reform pretty much every system, because everything is corrupt, from media to, politics to the financial system and so forth. So, if once Trump, Kennedy and so forth recognizes the full problem and starts to announce specifically what's happening, there's a very big job to do then to restore order back to its original democratic form before 2020.
All right, Richard Jeffs, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm a big fan of your work, and I love the idea of you relocating to the U.S. and speaking freely. I love that. So thanks a lot.
Likewise. Thanks for inviting me on your show, Tom. All the best.
Bye.